luckily we had negotiated that on the front end of this. We had planned for this exact event that happened less than 2 years after it occurred.
Today on Time We Discuss, I have Andy Contaguglia with me. Andy, thank you for joining me
Yes,
today.
you did it. No second takes. Right the first time.
But they say
The way
one
this
and done,
works,
right?
man. I love it. I love it. Sorry, for those who are just tuning in, we've been practicing this for the last 45 minutes, so it's all good.
Never mind the 3 months ago when we practiced for another
That's right,
45
when we
minutes.
did it the first time. Exactly.
So, Andy, you are a corporate business lawyer. You have your own firm. You do risk management. You're on the brink of starting a new PR firm. You have a lot of balls in the air right now.
A lot of
So,
balls in the air. I love it. As Ryan Serhant says, number of balls in the air all take different management. So you got to sort of move them around because as one goes up, another comes down. Deal with that one, throw it up, throw it away, whatever. But yes, balls aplenty, definitely.
let's talk about your typical day right now. I know a lot of people say I don't have a typical day, but let's do the best we can. What is a typical day like for you as a corporate attorney?
Oh, good Lord. Well, it really depends. Leave that. See, that's the typical lawyer answer. It depends because there's so many different factors that go into this. But my typical day, I am a father and family man first, and so that's a big deal for me, making sure that my, kids are well managed. But I'm up at 5 o'clock in the morning every day religiously. I am making my pour over coffee and going through my news feeds, checking my emails, and just sort of getting my head into the day. But typically, I'm out the door by 7:30 in the morning, dropping my kids off at school, and I'm at my office and ready to rock and roll. Usually between 8 and 8:30. A typical day for me, really, dealing with whatever crises are coming up for my clients. I do a lot of transactional work, so it's just a matter of queuing in and making sure that clients' needs are met, that contracts are drafted, and getting through the typical service that my company and that I provide to my clients, on a day-to-day basis. Because I need to sort of cue that in. And hey, when you're a service-based industry like I am, all you got in your life is time to sell. So that's what I try to do and manage it as best as I can. But on top of that, right now I'm a one-man band. I was, rocking and rolling a few years back with about 10 people in my firm, and it's just me right now. So I'm in this sort of restructuring phase. So I'm wearing all hats. I'm doing all my own marketing. I'm doing all my own business development. And as you mentioned, I am building out this public relations and crisis management company, which is sort of a good little pivot from, the law work that I do and building that out. So I've got that on top of soccer practice and all that wonderful stuff. Now that's just a typical transaction day. I go to court a lot, and there are weeks where I am in court every day. And if I'm in trial, that could be week after week after week in trial. So my days are pretty busy. 8 to 5. I try to pick my kids up at camp or at school or daycare, wherever that is, before 6 o'clock. My big thing in my decompression space is cooking. I love to cook. And so for me, the end of the day where I get to sort of prep food for my family and put everything is great. I get my family fed usually around 6:30, and I like to sort of iron chef it. I make my family pick a protein, pick a starch, and pick a veggie, and I'll whip something up for them pretty good. And that's like my downtime. That's sort of my creativity and downtime. I get my family to bed by 9, and then I'm usually working until 11 or midnight or so, and then starting the whole thing over again at 5 a.m. So I operate on very little sleep, but I'm pushing myself pretty hard most of the time. So I'm sure I'll blow up at some point, and everything will be done. So that's it. That's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
I'm gonna go out with a bang. That'll be the end of it.
So you run pretty hard during the weekdays. How about the weekend? Do you find time to peel away from your work, or is it kind of bleed into the weekend sometime, all the time? What's that typically like?
I my business coach is going to kill me. I do my best to try and not do work over the weekend, which is great. And she would be very, very happy that I said that. But she knows the reality of it. When you're wearing a number of different hats, things always come up. But what is really interesting, and I think this is something that your listeners can really take away, and something that I had to sort of manage and negotiate within my business as I saw clients starting to take advantage of me during times that I didn't want them to take advantage of me. I put premium services in my contract. So if you need me to do something that requires immediate attention, that I have to drop other work that I am doing, where I have to, you know, do something that is going to be due within a shorter period of time, I charge you a premium service for that. It's just that simple. Or if you need me to work on the weekend for something like that. And I really, I will say about 95% of the issues that come up for me with my clients on a weekend are not emergencies. They think they are. So it really comes down to a customer service, discussion with my clients and making sure that their needs are served and calming them down and saying, listen, here we go. This isn't as much an emergency as you need. Funny story, I did have one client who loved to go out and party all the time, and he was incredibly wealthy. He has now since settled down, gotten married, and calmed down a little bit. But back in his crazy days, he had flown down to Miami and was partying it up on Miami Beach. And I got a call from him at it was like 3 o'clock in the morning here, it was 5 o'clock in the morning in Miami. He was getting kicked out of a bar and he's like, they can't kick me out of this bar. Tell me what I can do. And I'm like, literally talking to him. I'm like, dude, like you need to just leave and go and get yourself back in shape. So I have been known to pick up the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning to serve my clients, but that is not everybody. It takes quite a bit of stamina to get to that point, and a long relationship. I'd known this guy for years, and he was really a close personal friend. Beside being a client of mine, and so that is the type of fun service that I get to engage in sometimes. And then my background as a criminal defense attorney really builds in well in doing corporate work sometimes. I represent CEOs and members of CEOs' families, and sometimes they get into trouble, and trouble doesn't have a time zone. So having to deal with that, those things come up too, and I gauge it. I decide, is this something I really need to make an emergency out of, or is this something I can manage tomorrow or Monday? And in the criminal justice system, sometimes, if somebody gets arrested on a Friday night, they're not going to see it inside of a courtroom until Monday. And so you can just sort of manage that. There are a few things you can talk to people about to do, but it's really a matter of managing that crisis in its immediate form and quelling the concerns and making sure and letting everybody know you're going to be okay. We will get you through this and everything's going to be fine. So
I think a lot of times with any field, I think a lot of times a service type field, that's what people really need, that reassurance that I understand it's going to be all right. We'll get through this. It's going to be rough, but we'll get through it.
it is. And especially as a lawyer, it's, anything can come from any direction and you need to know it. And of course it's high stress, it's high velocity. I am still shaking my head occasionally going like, why am I going into crisis management? It's kind of what I already do in sort of a consulting manner, but you sort of eliminate the legal component of it. So I'm not going to court. I'm not drafting pleadings. I'm not drafting contracts and things like that. It really sort of is in this, more of a consulting phase than anything else. And what I'm hopeful, fingers crossed here, put this right now on, full-fledged here. I really wish that my clients planned better. And I think that in the legal industry, many people who don't utilize lawyers the right way, they're very reactive when they use lawyers rather than being proactive. My mantra is I protect you on the front end so you don't take it in the back end. And I want to make sure that if we can plan for your future, you won't need me in the future. I mean, if I could plan me out of your life, that would be great. My analogy here is like, you don't go to the doctor after you have the heart attack. You go to the doctor before you have the heart attack because you want to prevent the heart attack. So just like me, come to me before the litigation starts. Come to me before the crisis begins. Come to me when you need to manage your public relations or you need to build something out or manage your brand so you don't run into these problems that 95%, if not more, can just be completely prevented.
Can you give us a tangible, and I understand what you're saying, but can you give us a tangible example of something a story maybe where someone, if they'd just done this one thing beforehand, they wouldn't have had to deal with what they ultimately had to deal with?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've got 100 of them. Let me just I'll tell you a legal story, and then I'll tell you one that's a little bit proactive, and then one that's a little bit more reactive. One in law and one in risk management. So I represent a number of different corporations and business dealings between business partners, and many times these business partners, one will start and they'll bring in a buddy from college, and that in this particular business, that's what happened. And my one client had built this company up, very, very successful architecture firm, and he was bringing in a buddy of his from college to come in and become a partner in the firm. So the guy who I had already been consulting, I had already been working for this corporation for a few years at this point when he brought in his buddy from college. And he's like, we need to do this, we need to do this. I'm like, yeah, absolutely, let's make sure we get everything documented perfectly, so if things go bad, you have something to fall back on. And he's like, well, I can't imagine what's going to go bad. This is my best buddy from college. And I'm like, yeah, you remember that, because that's going to be a very important factor. I wouldn't let him just do a handshake deal with his buddy. It was not going to happen. And so we peppered the deal. We did all the proper paperwork, put everything in place, built out a buyout provision, built in sort of a metric of what the buyout would be in years 0 to 1, 2 to 3, and 3 to 5, and 5 and more. And this best buddy of his from college didn't make it 2 years in this company. And they just had a completely misalignment in terms of how they envisioned the way that this company was going to operate and where it was going to go. When this friend from college was there working at the company, he was great. But when he became a partner and became an owner in the company, he just, decided to be a schlub and wasn't working and was depressed and was not interested in doing the things that he wanted to do or that he needed to do in order to make that company a successful company. As a result of that, man, the other owner, who was always running on 12 cylinders, just constantly, was just like, I can't deal with this anymore. We got to buy him out. And we ended up having to go through this whole buyout. And luckily we had negotiated that on the front end of this. We had planned for this exact event that happened less than 2 years after it occurred. So that's one very proactive. And the buyout was, there's a little bit of, it was tense a little bit. I mean, these guys have been friends for 20 years, and so they had to deal with the emotions of breaking up a business and the business relationship and all that kind of sense. So that's one example. That's a good proactive one. A reactive one in terms of using our services, not necessarily from a legal standpoint, but from a crisis management standpoint, is we represented a local um, education group here. So we call them a school. So we represented a school, and there were allegations about this school and one of the employees there having an inappropriate relationship with one of the students there. And so when this broke, everybody at the school was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And the principal of the school had a different view on how he wanted to manage the entire crisis versus what my law partner and I at the time, how we wanted to deal with this and manage it. So think about these events. You've got a lot of dynamics going on. You've got, oh my God, how's the school going to react to this? So now we have to, put on sort of a PR blitz. We have to do a few things. Number one, we've got to figure out what the hell's going on. That's the first thing. We need to do our own internal investigation. That's the second thing. Third thing is we have to manage a police investigation that's going on throughout the school. Now, on top of that, you have worried students, worried parents and families, and worried employees. So you've got all of these different issues just bombarding you over and over and over about how are we now going to manage this? And of course, we helped with drafting of a PR statement and things like that. And eventually, our goal here was we need to protect this company and get them from point A to point B with the least amount of chaos possible. So we managed sort of the PR and the risk management part of this. And eventually we were able to get the company's insurance company involved, because there are policies, and I would say most corporate policies and liability policies insure against this type of an event. And so we eventually ended up getting the insurance company involved and getting the lawyers involved. And we were able to make this nice transition from, all right, we've managed the crisis. We've now put it in kind of like paramedics and keeping the body in triage and making sure everybody's safe. So when you arrive at the emergency room, you can make the pass off, pretty easily. And so we were able to make a pass off to the insurance carrier and to, the insurance defense attorneys who were then able to take it on from a legal perspective, which is a little bit different from where we were looking at it, because now we've got money and liability and things like that involved, which our involvement in this in this at this phase was not, that wasn't what we were doing. I mean, we could have done it because we were lawyers and we had dealt in those issues before, but because they were insured, it was much more cost effective and economical for them to just pass the entire defense of this thing on to their lawyers and let the insurance company pay for it. So no longer out of pocket. So I think that's, a good example of something that reacted, that we had a good reaction to, and we're able to sort of manage it in that respect.
Those are two really, really great examples. When it comes to risk management, I don't know if you can put a number on this, but is there like a time period where it's like high stress, high anxiety, high emotions for the next 72 hours, and then it kind of like drops off and things kind of level out? Is there any kind of timeline like that where it's like you're all in for a certain period of time, or is it really just super fluctuate depending on the
You
issue?
know, you can never you never know when a crisis is going to happen. You can plan for crisis, but you don't know when it's going to explode. And there are things that you can do to sort of manage the risk within your business, within your organization. So, in the event a crisis does happen, you have a fast way of responding to it. And a good way of doing that, and there are a number of people who are involved in this, or in this type of work, and the key here is making sure that you have a team put together who can respond quickly to these events when they happen. So who are the key players in this? Who are the key decision makers in your company? Usually it's a CEO, a VP, CFO, a couple people in marketing, because you have to think about it like, if this event happens now, boom, here we are. What do I need to do to react to this? Well, I need key decision makers on direction. That's going to be basically your board of directors people. We need to be able to get something out quickly into the public, in that respect. What does that look like? So maybe we need somebody from the marketing team involved in this. So when something happens, we can start a social media blitz and we know exactly what we're going to do, in terms of putting something out like that. And I think the first few hours is real critical. You got to get that team together. You got to talk about the event and you got to figure out what direction you want. And your key decision makers really need to decide what that looks like. But in addition to that, Dan, you've got issues of your brand and your business identity that need to be factored into how you're going to react to this crisis. One of the worst PR crises, I think, that has come about in the last several years is the BP oil spill down in the Gulf, if you remember that. Um, you know, BP managed that horribly when millions and millions of gallons of oil are, plunging into the Gulf of Mexico, and the CEO of BP is, caught out on his yacht. He is out water skiing. He is out sunning it up. And, the world is going like, dude, you know what's going on across the water here? Because he was in Europe. He was out in Britain. So he's like, everybody's like, what's going on across the pond here, right? And he didn't care. And eventually, when he was cornered, he was just like, I can't wait to get through this. And I'm paraphrasing. He goes, I can't wait to get through this. I just want my life back. And everybody was just like, since when the heck is this about you? This is about, let's not forget the 11 people who died when the Deepwater Horizon exploded. But what about the problems of, all of the oil and how you're going to clean this up and all of these things? Eventually, this guy lost his job over that. And I'm really oversimplifying the story. He lost his job over it, and eventually BP came in, and they were able to get everything under control. But you contrast that to, when the Exxon Valdez crashed up in Alaska several decades ago. Exxon Mobil, they handled that in a much different fashion. About, we are here, we're going to put these things together, and we're going to take care of the community. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that this is managed properly. Another really good example of what I have seen and what I've studied in terms of changes in good crisis management are companies that like change the industry as a result of the crisis that happened to them. A really good example is is Tylenol. So if you think back to the mid '80s, yeah, you remember. I don't know. I don't think you're old enough to remember.
Oh yeah.
You're like six. So here we are. You know, in mid '80s, you've got the Tylenol scare with the cyanide poisonings of the Tylenol. You know, Tylenol pulled all the caplets off of the shelves, and they, you know, their PR part of this was we're going to give them the tablets because we know those haven't been, um, you know, tampered with. We're going to give those for free, free exchange, give them out. You know, they lost market share for a little bit, but what they did was they changed an entire industry. And that is every time now that you go and you get a packet or a bottle of medicine and you take off that top, there is that little foil wrap that sits over the top of that bottle. That is all because of that Tylenol thing. And Tylenol, and I think it's Johnson and Johnson, their parent company, they changed the industry in that. And now that is the norm. So their reaction in having to deal with that crisis became better for all of us. You know, you didn't see that with BP. You saw portions of that with, you know, the Exxon spill. So ideally, if I think if businesses look at, you know, an opportunity, and I think there's an old Chinese proverb that says basically through crisis comes opportunity. And you need to be able to use these events in your life, in your business as opportunities to make change and to grow as an organization. And I think that really is the lesson out of all of this, which is don't get freaked out by crises. Use it as opportunities to motivate you. If you're a type of person that like needs the sky falling down on top of you to motivate to get something done, use it for that opportunity, or use it as an opportunity to make a pivot, to make a change. You know, with me, you know, I'm going to call it a crisis for lack of a better term. When I had, you know, just earlier this year, you know, everybody in my law firm leaving to go do things that weren't law related. And I was like, or out of the state. And I'm like, this is great. Now what am I going to do? You know, I had to triage, you know, I had 4 people's caseload that I now had to take on as one person. So I had to triage that, but I used it as an opportunity to make this shift into doing, you know, other things. So I think everybody can use a difficult situation to their betterment somehow.
I love that. I love all that. And when you mentioned the Tylenol case, when you first started that, I thought, I hope he mentions that because I feel like that is like that is the one that everyone references, and I love
It
that.
is. It's
Um,
great.
Speaking with another attorney, we talked about the whole the avenue of education. So I'm actually going to skip that question on you.
On the what education? I'm sorry.
Just education in general, like undergrad leading into law school and that sort of
Roger
thing.
that.
So
Okay.
we'll skip
Yeah,
that.
don't go to law school. That's my pitch about law school. Don't go to law school.
One question I'd like to ask when I'm talking to different people and the careers that they're pursuing, I'd like to look at different personality traits or things people might like, they might not necessarily like when they're considering a job or a career. Looking at being an attorney, if someone has a particular skill set, what would preclude them from being a good attorney? So, like maybe they're lousy at organizing, or they don't like to read, or they don't like to write. What are some things that would be like, you know what, maybe being an attorney isn't for you?
That's a great question. And, you know, I don't remember if I told you this the first time. You know, I went to law school wanting to be a prosecutor, but I went to college wanting to be an anthropologist and archaeologist. That was where I went. And I ended up hating my professors, so I made the switch. And I think I was influenced by members of my family who were lawyers and things like that. And I had these, you know, big delusions of grandeur and things like that in terms of the law. But to answer your question specifically, the neat thing about law is most of it you can delegate. If you can hire people to keep you organized. If you are not good about calendaring events, you can get a paralegal or a secretary to do that kind of thing. If you stink at writing, you can hire people who are better at writing than you. Um, and I do think that there are lawyers who excel better in some areas than others. Me, I love going to trial. I come from a theater background, and so being on stage and being in front of people, if you haven't figured this out, my very dynamic and engaging, um, and modest, don't forget that part of it. I enjoy getting up in front of people and, you know, talking with them and engaging with them and becoming a part of whatever is going on in their life at that time. That is a big skill to have as a trial attorney, because there are a lot of lawyers who have to go to trial, but they don't have that skill and they have to learn it or they have to develop it or they're terrified of doing it. And that, hinders you a little bit. But then there are others who have like I am not a details type of person. I hate going through contracts and looking at the minutia. I do it, but it is grueling and I hate it. Hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it. But there are other lawyers who just love getting in the minutia. They just dig in, dig in, dig in, and you get back, a redlined contract with 1,000 different, changes in it, and they've, just changed the wording of one sentence that doesn't change the substance of it at all. They just like to word it a little bit differently, and just like, really, we're going to talk about Grammarly now, and so you're sitting in it in that respect. And then, of course, there's all those different areas of law. If somebody wants to go to law school, I think they should. Let me back up. I think a law degree is a great degree. I think a law degree is better than a business degree, just because of the opportunities that it gives you. Now, you're not going to learn the corporate finance and the management consulting pieces of it that you'll learn through like getting an MBA and stuff like that, even though you could throw those components into it. Or you do what I do and you go and you start representing businesses and you learn it just by engaging in it. So that is there. I mean, if I had to go back and do it again, I kid you not, I probably would go to med school. My father, I grew up as a doctor's son, and so I look back and I'm like, God, I could be running my dad's business right now, and it would be great, and I wouldn't have to deal with people at 3 o'clock in the morning getting thrown out of bars in Miami. But I think it's different for everybody, and you need to be able to draw on your unique personality traits to figure out exactly where in the law is the best place for you. I would not go into law if you don't like high energy and highly stressful situations. I think there are few areas of law that provide a nice, cuddly, huggy moment. I live my life where half the people I engage with hate me. So if they are opposite me in a case and I win, they hate me because I won. If I'm opposite somebody on a case and I lose, my client hates me and the other side loves me. So I'm in a no-win situation. I'm always going to be, hated by 50% of the people I engage with, which is part of the reason why I try to be so collaborative in the work I want to do. So if I can leave this with both parties being miserable, I've done my job. Or if they're both happy, then I've done my job. And so you've got to look at it, I think, in that respect. One of the big things in law, as I think in any business, is your credibility. If you lose your credibility, you will have no opportunity to get it back. And I think, as you look at like brand building and things like that, if you can maintain your credibility, you will be able to go really, really far, because at the end of the day, that's all I got. I know I have relationships with so many different judges, here in the Denver metro area. I can walk into any courtroom and they'll know who I am. And if I go in and I need something because something came up, they will likely give me the benefit of the doubt in that and say, yeah, I will, I'll go ahead and give that to you. So, if I didn't have that credibility, because there are a lot of lawyers who don't have that kind of credibility, and the judges don't give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think you need benefits of the doubt, in every type of business, because the moment you ruin that, you're not going to go very far.
I remember, talking to different people, and it's especially when it comes to like the hiring process. Anyone can learn different skills, generally speaking, but a lot is that personality, how you work with people, and if you have that things are good, and if you don't work well with people, that could really hold you back.
Yeah,
Andy,
and
I am running a little short on time,
you got it.
unfortunately. So let me just give you like a minute or two. One thing I like to do is let the person I'm speaking with talk about a cause they believe in, a project they're working on, a business, a new business. So I'll hand the floor over to you for just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. As I mentioned early on, I am sort of making this pivot and I'm starting this new company. It's called Ethia Strategies, ETHIA. Ethia Strategies. It is a public relations and crisis management company. So I'm taking my skills in the legal community and sort of pivoting them into working with corporations and businesses and keeping them out of trouble and helping them when they are in trouble. So it's a different perspective on what I'm already doing. In addition to that, I do have my own podcast, the Don't Skip the Legal podcast, that I would love for people to engage in. I'm a little slow in launching it. I've about 10, 12 episodes in it now, but I'm still building that up on top of everything else that I'm doing. I also wrote a book by the same name called Don't Skip the Legal. It's your legal and practical guide to growing your business and scaling your business for business owners and entrepreneurs, and that can be found on Amazon. And then of course my law firm. So those are my big things right now. And I always love engaging with people. I'm always available to answer questions for people. And I would encourage anybody who wants to connect with me. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on TikTok. You can find me, pick your social media platform. I will have a presence in some form or fashion there. So yeah, here you go. Right here. Don't skip the legal.
I love it. Andy, I'll make sure I get all those links from you. I'll put them in the show notes. They're going to be on the website.
Awesome.
They're going to be all over the place. So when people are looking for you, they can easily find you.
Hopefully. You just put in Contaguglia. There aren't many of us.
No.
You got to spell it right, though. At least we didn't give you that test today.
Yeah. Andy, it's been awesome having you on. Time to discuss and learn what it's like to be a corporate attorney and the person starting a new PR firm.
There you go, man. Appreciate your time, and it's great to connect again. So I hope we can do it again.